Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you, and this is how to draft MTG. I wanted to do a video about the best rares and mythics in Bloomburrow. These are the cards that you should never pass when you see them in the first couple of packs in the draft. As always, please click like and click subscribe to support the channel. It helps a huge amount. Leave a comment, say hi, give me some feedback, or let me know what you want to see, what you want me to cover in future videos. Let's get right into it. Whatever you do in Bloomburrow Limited, do not pass these rares. If you see these first pick, slam them or click your mouse really hard. I understand if it's late in pack 3 and you're in different colors, you're not going to be able to pick these up, but early in the draft, you should be taking these and trying to put them in your deck at all costs. First is Season of Loss. 3 black for a sorcery. You get to choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes. And you can choose the same mode more than once. For 1 paw print, each player sacrifices a creature. For 2 paw prints, you draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn, and for 3 paw prints, each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So most often, with this card, you're going to be paying 5 of the first mode, so each player sacrifices 5 creatures, or you're going to choose the first mode 3 times, so each player will sacrifice 3 creatures, and then you'll choose the second mode to draw 3 cards. Either one of those executions of the card is going to have a huge impact on the game state, and even more so as your opponent's unlikely to see this coming as it's a mythic rare card. Keep an eye because occasionally that third mode can kill your opponent if you've already done some self-mill, if you're in black-green, for example, or black-blue. And if you make each player sacrifice 2 creatures, that's 2 additional creatures in your graveyard. That could be enough to deal the final points of damage to your opponent. Next is Fecund Greenshell. 3 green for a 4/6 reach. As long as you control 10 or more lands, creatures you control get +2/+2. And whenever it or another creature you control with toughness greater than its power enters, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, put it into your hand. A lot of text on this card, but even just a 5-mana 4/6 reach that threatens to take over the game if left alone is a huge threat. And of course, if you can do a little bit of building around by including creatures with big butts, then you're going to be really happy with Fecund Greenshell. It also just happens to fit in 4 of the better archetypes, as green is one of the better colors in the format. Next is Dreamdew Entrancer. 2 green for a 3/4 frog with reach. When it enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you control that creature, draw 2 cards. So a bit of a tricksy card here, but most often I think you're going to be targeting an opponent's creature and locking it down for 3 turns, which is pretty similar to killing it. In the Frog's deck, you're going to be able to re-trigger this ability by blinking the Entrancer or returning it back to your hand and replaying it. So it should be pretty trivial to lock down your opponent's entire board and have them unable to play the game. You can also get really fancy if you want to enrage your opponent on the other side of the table and target your own creatures with this, drawing extra cards and then blinking or bouncing those creatures to escape the negative effect of them being stunned for 3 turns. This is a really excellent reason to be drafting blue-green, which is not one of the best decks in the format, but is certainly a strong tier 2 archetype, and if you've got rares like this, it's going to be excellent for you. Warleader is next. 2 white for a 4/4 rabbit with Offspring 2. It says, whenever you attack, choose 1. Create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token that's tapped and attacking, or attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So on its own, this is a great rate. As a 4-mana 4/4, it's going to generate an army of rabbits for you by itself and then pump them up for the win. And of course, it has a lot of synergy with what white's trying to do. All the white decks are interested in amassing an army of rabbits, and this is exactly what you want in any white deck. Valley Questcaller is next. This is 1 and a white for a 2/3 rabbit. It says, whenever 1 or more rabbits, bats, birds, and or mice you control enter, scry 1. And other rabbits, bats, birds, and mice you control get +1/+1. So most of the white creatures you're going to be putting in your deck are going to be of these types. This is already pretty good as a 2-mana 2/3, but getting the additional scry is super valuable, and of course pumping up your team is great as well. And it's a 2-drop, so it's going to hit the field early and have a big impact on the game. This fits in any white deck and is an easy first pick. Next is Maha, it's Feathers Knight. This is 3 black for a 6/5 flying trample with ward, discard a card. So your opponent has to discard a card if they want to target this with a removal spell. They may not always be able to do that, so that's pretty nice. And it says creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. So this is a massive flying beater that's going to threaten to kill your opponent in a couple of turns unless they 2-for-1 themselves by having a removal spell plus discarding a card. And it makes it really difficult for them to attack and block, especially if they're playing a deck like green-black or green-red where the creatures tend to be a little bit bigger. They will no longer have the advantage of being able to beat your creatures in combat on offense or defense. All of that for the reasonable price of 5 mana, and it's only in one color, one of the best colors in the format, black. Next is Sword of Fire and Ice, a nice little throwback here. You may not have even been aware that this was in the set, much like myself. It's pretty rare you're going to see this as it's a special guest, so it won't show up in your packs very often, but when it does, make sure you pick it. It's 3 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from red and from blue. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, Sword of Fire and Ice deals 2 damage to any target and you draw a card. Its equip cost is 2. The fact that this is colorless, of course, means that it's going in any deck, and the effects it grants are absurdly powerful. Blue is not a super popular color in the format, but if you ever get matched up against a blue deck or a red deck, they're going to have a heck of a time attacking or blocking or removing your creatures when they have protection. Up next, we have Ygra, Eater of All, 3 black-green for a 6/6 with ward, sacrifice a food. It says other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their other types and have 2 mana, tap, sacrifice this permanent, you gain 3 life, just like any food would. And it says whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on Ygra, Eater of All. So it doesn't make all the other creatures lose abilities, but they do have this food type in addition to their other types. So this thing is going to be really hard to deal with for your opponents, as they have to sacrifice a food just to pay the ward cost. If they don't have a food, that means they're sacrificing a creature, and either way, this at a baseline is really like an 8/8 if they're trying to remove it, because it's going to get those 2+1/+1 counters right away. If you've got extra mana up, you can also sacrifice your own creatures if you need to pump it up to save it. And of course, just by attacking and blocking normally with this and your other creatures, and by using removal spells, your opponent's creatures are going to die a fair bit, and this is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. So this is a must-answer threat, super efficient. It's in the best colors. You want this early in the draft. Next is Innkeeper's Talent. It's a class enchantment for 1 and a green. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You can level it up for a single green at level 2. It says permanents you control with counters on them have ward 1. And for 3 and a green, you can make it level 3. It says if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. So this will take over a game quite easily, even if you just have a couple of creatures. If they just get bigger and bigger, it's easy to level up, and then your creatures are difficult to interact with. And the level 3 mode isn't even really a factor with this card. The first 2 levels are all that you're interested in, and that's enough to steamroll your opponent all by itself. Also handy that it's just a 2 mana card in one of the strongest colors. Mabel, Heir to Cragflame is next. This is 1 red, white for a legendary mouse. It's a 3/3. It says other mice you control get +1/+1. And when Mabel enters, you create Cragflame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token with equipped creature gets +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste. And the equip cost is 2. So this pumps up all the mice in your red-white deck and gives you the equipment to repeatedly trigger their valiant abilities when you need to. This is one of the biggest reasons to want to be drafting red-white. So if you see it early, I would lean as heavy into white as you can and hope that the red cards come as well, and you're going to have a good deck on your hands. Next is Season of Gathering. 4 green for a sorcery. Choose up to 5 paws worth of modes. For 1 paw, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and it gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. For 2 paws, you can choose artifact or enchantment and destroy all permanents of the chosen type. And for 3 paws, you can draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. All these modes are quite useful. I found most often you either just want to put 5 1/1 counters amongst your team and swing in for a ton of damage, but sometimes you just put 2 counters on 2 creatures and then do the 3-paw mode to draw a ton of cards. And that 2-paw mode even comes in handy from time to time if they've got a creature of yours underneath a Banishing Light, or if they have a really good class enchantment, you could deal with that as well. Super powerful, super flexible, gonna have a huge effect on the game no matter what, and it's in green. Next is Vren the Relentless, 2 blue-black for a 3/4 legendary rat with Ward 2. It says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And then at the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature gets +1/+1 for each other rat you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. So for each creature of your opponents that dies, you're going to be getting a rat, and all those rats are going to pump each other up. This just makes an enormous board in short order. It's hard to kill, and it is the reason to want to be drafting blue-black. So this is a great card to pick early because of how low most drafters are on blue. You'll have to fight for the black cards a little bit, but you should be able to put together a decent enough shell around this to have a good deck in the draft. Try to prioritize card draw spells to go digging for this, removal spells to trigger it, of course, and recursion spells to get it back from the graveyard if it does get killed. Manifold Mouse is next. This is 1 red for a 1/2 mouse with Offspring 2. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, target mouse you control gains your choice of double strike or trample until end of turn. So as a 2-mana play, this is essentially attacking and blocking as a 2/2 since it's got double strike. If you can put counters on it, then it's going to go crazy. If you can Offspring it, now you've got 2 instances of double strike and trample that you can spread around your team each turn. And of course, this is going to trigger all of your Valiant stuff if you're in red-white. So regardless of whether you're in red-white, this is going to be a great early pick and you're going to play it in any red deck. But of course, if you are in red-white, it's going to be at its very best there. Next is Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest, 3 red for a 5/5 with flying. It says whenever Dragonhawk enters or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So another card that's just excellent on its own and goes even crazier if you've got a few other big creatures on the board. This card and Manifold Mouse in particular are really good reasons to want to be drafting red, which is nice in this set because red is one of the weaker colors. So in theory, you will get some of red's better cards a little bit later in the draft, and when you're backing up really good rares like these, it's going to bring your deck up to the level of one of the top decks or even beyond. Next is Beza. I want to say Beza, but maybe it's Beza. The Bounding Spring. It's 2 white for a 4/5. It says when it enters, create a treasure token if an opponent controls more lands than you. You gain 4 life if an opponent has more life than you. And you create 2 1/1 blue fish tokens if an opponent controls more creatures than you. Then you draw a card if an opponent has more cards in hand than you. So 4 mana 4/5 that's going to even things up with the opponent, bring you back from behind. Just a really, really powerful effect. Any white deck wants this. That is going to do it for the rares you shouldn't pass. There's lots of other great rares in this set. We're going to go over them in the archetype-specific videos. So stay tuned for those videos. Thank you so much for watching. Click like, click subscribe, leave a comment, say hello, reach out to me, howtodraftmtg@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Until next time, bye for now.